I'm going to show you how to make a really simple template in Procreate that you can use to make quick storyboard thumbnails or sketches. So I'm starting in Adobe Premiere, I'm making a new sequence, and I'm ensuring that we're working at a 1920 by 1080 ratio, which is a pretty standard video format. Once I make the sequence, here I'm going to screenshot the blank video. And as you can see in Finder, the dimensions of this screenshot are exactly 1920 by 1080, which is a standard video format. Now I'm hopping over to my iPad in Procreate, and I'm just going to make a blank canvas to screen size. Now I bring this still into Procreate, and I lower the opacity so that it becomes a gray box. I make a new layer, and I set that layer to Drawing Assist and snap it to the 2D grid. I change the color of the grid to something more manageable, which in this case is a light pink, so that I can see my black lines. Now you'll see that I'm going to just create two sides of the box, and I prefer for it to look a little bit sketchier and just slightly messier because I feel like it gives it a more natural, traditional storyboarding look. And then I simply duplicate the two sides of the box, and I flip it vertically and I flip it horizontally so that it forms the other side of the box. Then I align it and merge the layers to create my first box. Now I align the box where I want it to be in the frame, and I simply duplicate it and position it where I want my next box. Here I'm selecting snapping magnetics to ensure that the second box will be perfectly parallel. The distance between the boxes is totally up to your preference. Then I merge these boxes and duplicate, and with snapping and magnetics turned on, move that duplicated 2-box layer over and perfectly align it with the second box. Then delete the second box. I then merge these 3 boxes into one layer, duplicate, and move that down into a new row of boxes. I merge the 6 boxes together into one layer and duplicate that, move that down, again using the same technique, overlapping one layer, to create a 3rd row of boxes. This ensures that the spacing between the boxes is equal. I adjust my canvas size as I go, again to preference, and I continue the process. This creates a nice even grid for me to later sketch within the template. Once I have my grid and I'm satisfied with the shape of the canvas, I merge the box layers into one box line layer. I take that box line layer and duplicate it multiple times and merge them into one in order to create a thickened line layer. This is a temporary layer that I'm going to use to select the negative space between the boxes using the selection tool and automatic selection. Once I've selected as much of the negative space as possible, I create a new layer and use this selection to create a mask on that layer. On that layer, I can fill with any color or shade, and all this does is create a mask between the boxes so that anything we sketch underneath the boxes will be nice and tidy and contained within their own box. You can use black, white, gray, or a color, a brand color. It really doesn't matter. It's up to your preference. And now I'm making a layer underneath the box line layer and the mask, and that's where I'm going to do my sketching. And as you can see here, I'm using Align to Sketch, and everywhere between the boxes is nice and tidy so that whatever we sketch within each little box is going to be perfectly contained within the box. I typically make a layer on top of all of the layers in which I number each box, and typically my preference is to use red for this numbering. Here I'm just numbering all of them 1 through 15, which I use in standard templates, but sometimes it's better to wait until the project is fully sketched. For various reasons, you might use a numbering system that is a little bit different than standard 1 through 15 or so on. For example, some of the frames that you sketch might be 1A, 1B, 3A, 3B, that sort of thing. On another layer, I am demonstrating how I create arrows. I typically use blue for this to contrast with the red. Personally, I use red for numbers and red for camera moves, and I use blue for action and blocking of characters and props within the frame. So that's how I usually make my templates to get sketching quickly. And I personally feel it's really important to take ownership of making your own templates. It might sound silly, but for me, when I was learning painting, teachers always emphasized how important it was to create your own canvases from scratch. This included getting your stretcher bars, connecting them together to create the box shape, taking the canvas and stretching it over the box frame, priming the canvas using gesso, and just going through that whole process of creating your blank canvas. And I just think it gives a personal touch that makes it feel like I have ownership over the entire image and the entire project when I can add a personal touch to every line that's put down on the page. So this is the basic template format that I use for my storyboarding process for live action TV commercials and sometimes films. I'll also add that this template is primarily for thumbnails and roughs. Typically, after I do this process, I take each individual frame, increase the size, and polish up that image at a higher resolution to create the final frame. You also don't have to remove the images from your template. As long as you make your template large enough so that each frame is about, I would say, 3-ish inches high, then you should have images that are large enough to work for your project. The reason why I export and finish things up as individual frames is because that's the preference of most of my clients. There's a lot of room for modification in this process. You can increase the space between each box so that you can fit numbers so that they don't overlap. You can use text instead of drawing in the numbers. You can also create more space underneath each box so that yourself or a director has room to add little notes. And I hope that this process gives other people a jumping off point to make their own templates in the way that's most helpful to them.